Well, good morning, everybody. I've got a lot planned for you on this Friday, and it's going to begin with a quick discussion about some new evidence about the potential impacts over the next maybe 3 to 7 years from the volcano that erupted back in January of 2022, the one that was east of Australia. After we get through that, I want to talk about the May forecast verification and see how well models did and the analogs did. We get into this near-term pattern, which still continues to give us a lot of storm activity. We're going to talk about the heat that's coming into the west soon in the month of June, and we want to see how long that's going to last. And then we're going to take a look at what we've got for any sort of new long-range information, understanding that our new big model updates will come out next week. I'll finish it with a bit of international weather. So I've left you here on this map showing stratospheric water vapor. So if you look, the y-axis is where the pressure is 100 millibars to 3 millibars. So this is deep in the atmosphere. And that eruption, which happened right here in January 2022, increased stratospheric water vapor load by about 10%. And we have been looking at papers, trying to assess and trying to attribute the volcanic eruption and the water vapor load increase in the stratosphere to our weather patterns. And it's been difficult, I'll be honest. I can't necessarily tie to any one thing. But just yesterday, I kind of get a report of this, and there was a new paper that was released that I'm anticipating reading this weekend, if I get a chance to read it this weekend. But it's looking at the long-term climate impacts of that stratospheric water perturbation or change, the impulse of that water into the stratosphere. It was written by a couple of, or three scientists out of Australia. And of course, they were kind of ground zero for this. This was just off their northeastern coast that this occurred. And this was published in a reputable journal. The journal is the Journal Climate. That is one that has been around for a very long time. And it's got a very strict and tough process to get published in it. So this is good research that is published here. I'm looking forward to seeing it. I did glance through it this morning, and I'm just going to show you this. I have not yet read it. But one of the things I'm interested in understanding is how they came up with these temperature and precipitation anomalies over the next 3 to 7 years, which is what's shown here. I want to be careful not to over-attribute anything in the forecast to one specific event, but I want to let you know we're just going to continue to look at it. All right, so I wanted to start off there. I think when I get here, have you noticed I've been very reluctant to talk about analogs or groups of analogs, even though I kept mentioning 2020 as a possible analog. I'm always very hesitant to show you this, and this is one of the big reasons why. Back at the end of April, I made these back in February, but we kept looking at them through March and into April. And this was what we said, well, if May is going to follow these other years, which transitioned from El Nino to La Nina, it could look like this. And, we didn't put it out there as gospel truth, but we just said, hey, this is a possibility. Better chances of being warm in the northwest, cool in through this region. If we're drier, maybe getting a chance at open planting windows, it's here. And I imagine some of you watching this right now are just kind of laughing. I would too. I quit showing it to you at the end of April because this was not looking like it was anywhere close to being what we were going to see this year. And what that means is that every year has its own flavor of a transition into spring. And if you remember back in April, one of the first things I said is we got to take May a week at a time because I don't think we have a solid evidence as to what it might look like for the whole month. And so if we're going to grade these things, this is a pretty solid F. In fact, it's almost like you give the kid the test and he gets every single question wrong, maybe on purpose, but man, it was just completely flip-flopped. Let's take a look at what the CPC did. The Climate Prediction Center's forecast, which was released on April 30th, which means they're actually going to release a new one today for June. It's before I record, but we should get that soon. Better. This was actually much better overall in terms of their forecast. So they went against analogs, and they were looking, of course, at the continuation of the late April pattern, and that was smart on their part to do this. I've been very impressed with the CPC as of late. What about the European model? This was the forecast it released back on the 30th, and it did pretty well too, grabbing this pattern. There's always nuances to this and things where it missed, but what am I validating these precipitation and temperature forecasts against is here. So this is your, through May 30th, your precipitation ranks by climate district. And there's some ones on this, meaning wettest Mays on record, like this one right here in part of Kentucky. In fact, a lot of the Mid-South, getting into Tennessee, Kentucky, over toward the Appalachian Mountains and into North Carolina, extremely wet. Much of this rainfall down here was earlier in the month. They've had a little bit of a drier stretch as of late, but that just shows you how wet things have been. Extremely hot and dry in Florida, very hot and dry in the southern part of Texas, western Texas, and even though we've had cooler weather in the Great Basin, it's been quite cool there and through the Four Corners states. I know a lot of attention is being put on planting and replanting issues, and of course we'll talk about the severe weather in a second in the Midwest, but I want to take note of just how wet parts of Iowa are right now. It's been extremely problematic for farmers in this part of the Corn Belt, but they're weighing this against the longer term benefits of the recharging of soil moisture, which is critical to think about as well. I made this map this morning and I don't like it, but I'm going to show it to you anyway. I put too many numbers on top of it. I'll fix this and get it going for you. But this again is May, looking at percent of average precipitation, and it's a different data set than the one I normally show you. This one comes from Prism, and it's just to kind of zoom in here and have a quick look at things. Notice there's a lot of areas in through here that are well over 300% of average, and there are a few spots in here that are, like we've been talking about, 800 to 1,000% of normal. A couple of these spots in through here, and they're getting storms in this area this morning. But later on, I'm going to make a long-range forecast, and I'm going to step away from showing you models and just say, if you give me this snapshot of the way things are, where do I think it could go? And this has got me concerned. And that's sneaking down into Mexico and what that means for maybe the persistence of ridging in the west. But we've had 2 to 3 times the normal rainfall in parts of the upper Midwest, the western Corn Belt, and this part of the Mid-South extremely wet as of late too. So I just thought this map could kind of provide some context to some of the narrative we've been carrying. I did also want to show you the newest update on the cumulative solar downward flux maps. This is over the last 30 days, and it's to make a point that despite the incredibly heavy rainfall we've had in here, it's been mostly coming from huge thunderstorm events which blow up late in the day and or carry on overnight. And so we've had sunshine in this area, which honestly has been a big benefit. Otherwise, we would have been in pretty serious trouble here had that not been the case in this part of the country. Take a look at how much or how big of a lack of sunshine we've had here. And then, of course, your eye is drawn to the Canadian prairie, getting over to Ontario and Quebec. Just a lot of cloud in this area that needs to be thought about. We've also had right along the California coast a lot of May gray is what they call it. Kind of the marine stratocumulus layer comes in and just sits over the coastal areas, which can be problematic. But from the beginning of the month, looking at 100 centimeter soil moisture data, this is modeled from NASA, to now at the end of the month, there's one thing that just continues to stick out, and that's right in through here. Despite the slow-moving storms that rolled through this area, we still have major subsoil moisture issues in Kansas, parts of Oklahoma, Texas. And these issues kind of stem, as we looked at earlier in this week, from major deficits in moisture here that are getting pulled into this region, which continue to dry out the air at times. When they get rain, it's typically followed by heat, which evaporates a lot of it, and then we get some stronger winds, and so we're not able to retain that moisture in the soil. I also want to note what's going on in Florida as well. This is important to note some of the very high temperatures and lack of soil moisture in certain areas that we just have to continue to look at. But with all of this moisture, this has been a very wet spring for a lot of people. We have a lot of our rivers right now that are in some sort of action or minor, moderate, or major flood stage. I just wanted to give you the latest from water.noaa.gov just to see where those locations are across the U.S. And I've been getting asked a lot about the Mississippi River, so if we just go have a look at it, it's about 22 feet above low stage, and this is what late winter into spring has done. It's been a complete recharging of that whole basin, which is going to be just critical looking forward. And by the way, a lot of this water coming through Memphis is coming from both the Ohio and the Missouri as well. And don't forget parts of Montana earlier in the month that were exceptionally wet too. So I made something just because I wanted to see this. I went out and just wrote a little script to go download all of the drought monitor maps every week from January 2020. And I was just curious what it looked like. So I put it in a little slider here just to see how drought evolved throughout 2020. That's how we ended up 2020. Then you get into 2021. And remember, 2021 had exceptional ridging in the northwestern United States in summer, just breaking all-time records here, extremely hot and dry in the west, major fire year. We get into 2022 where we begin to transition out of La Nina into this El Nino event. And then watch, at the end of 2022 into the beginning of 2023, we just wipe out drought that's in the west. I mean, just really hit hard, and it begins to show up here. And as we play forward into 2023, finishing up 2023, it was a reminder that last fall, the exceptional drought in the southern plains, the drought that built into parts of the Midwest, and the drought that still remained here, it was important to look at. And I said southern plains, but I meant the southern Mississippi River Valley, the delta getting into the southeast. That was in fall. And watch this. We'll go a little slower. This was the beginning of the year here. February, March, April, May, end of May. And now we have drought area in the lower 48. That's D1 to D4, down around 12% or lower. And that is a remarkable spring. That's a lot of water in a short amount of time to change this whole map. So I love doing this, just like looking at the pattern. Can your eyes just kind of find, your brain just searches out for shifts and patterns and things. And I just find that fascinating to be able to watch it like that. Okay, let's get on to one other thing. I pulled up the NDVI data for the United States, and this does include Alaska, just so you know. So as you look at the United States here, we're above average on our NDVI values. That's what a wet spring does. A lot of people have very green lawns in parts of the country. But I want to show you this. We've often thought about 19 as a comparison year. 19 is what gave us the top NDVI values. So all of that rain through this part of the year kept a lot of vegetation extremely green. So this isn't too useful, I understand, at this point, but it's just a point of reference here overall. Now, what we have to really talk about is the amount of severe weather we've had. And I've shown you this multiple times over the last couple of weeks. But just if you look at the month of May alone, that's its contribution to the total number of severe storm reports. The annual is here. And just to give you some statistics on this, we're at about 140% of average on tornadoes, about 112% of average on hail, and we are at about 167% of normal on severe wind reports. And this does not include what just happened yesterday. Let's go back and have a look at it here, where we saw just, again, storms blowing up in the southern and high plains and just rolling east across parts of Texas. If we look at the hail just from those storms in the last 3 days, you can see that corridor that's been extremely active. We're pushing that dry line much, much farther to the west. And what's doing it are these storms the day before and in the overnight pushing their outflow farther and farther back to the west. I mean, that's another way to do it. You can either get a low here that just sits and spins to pull the moisture, or storms in this area that have the ability to send their outflow back into this direction. And total rainfall, let's streak that up a little bit, sorry. Total rainfall just over the last 72 hours through 6 a.m. this morning here really just shows this extremely active corridor. While we watched one low exit, another one enter. There's been some big storms up north here too. Don't let me miss out on those, but this has been this extremely wet corridor in through this region. Some places picking up 4, 5, 6 plus inches of rain. And yesterday it just kept going. Take a look at the satellite data. See the storms, I mean, they're blowing up almost here where the major elevation shift happens. So this was yesterday through the afternoon and evening. Let's kind of pause it right there just to give you this glimpse of this low that's up in Canada, butting up against a ridge that's over the Great Lakes. There's wildfire smoke coming into some of this here. You can see the wildfire smoke in Mexico. But these storms down in Texas, holy smokes, these were huge. And locally, just the tornadic storms sitting on the Rio Grande, and overnight, we just continued to watch them. And this is where they are this morning. Let's get an update on this. There we go. This is just a quick play of the radar through early this morning. And watch this squall line just continue to push right where they've been pushing, heading toward Houston early this morning. And big bow echo here. Let's stop this and get you farther there. Look at the size of that racing here through parts of Texas, which just continues to get hit. And remember, this is that area that some pockets have had 10 times the normal rainfall in the month of May. So we still have 3 more days of this and possibly a bit more, but this would be today's severe storm outlook, the convective outlook from the Storm Prediction Center. High Plains, Western Plains, Texas over to the Mississippi Valley, lower Mississippi Valley. We think into tomorrow. This is Saturday, and we get into Sunday. We talked about that upper Midwest, Northern Plains risk. A lot of this is being promoted by the flow. Take a look at this. This little piece right here coming over this large Mexican ridge. Well, it's got a little trough out ahead of it. We're going to watch that one sneak through parts of the Missouri and Ohio and Mississippi Valley, but the flow's still moving. Now, you know what I'm watching. We're watching for changes that are going to happen kind of half a world away that are going to get pulled into this jet stream that could start to give us a bit of a shift, bringing some heat into the western United States. But more on that in a minute after we see where this forecast is going. How well were the models initialized this morning? Not well. I mean, again, this is what they've got through early this morning, and we know that there's a big squall line rolling through here right now. So as we watch it going forward, this is through the rest of the day today into tonight, a lot of scattered storms here, scattered storms in the upper Midwest, western Corn Belt. Watch again for the plains. This is into the overnight. There's that low we kind of talked about yesterday sneaking into Missouri, Illinois, and here along the Ohio River. That's moving right through the eastern Corn Belt, stretching down into this part of the Cotton Belt. This is now getting out to here on Saturday afternoon and evening. And we just see more complexes of storms rolling through the plains. We got to see if these can get better moisture into Kansas and Oklahoma and northern Texas. They need it. And we have another low coming into the Pacific Northwest. Now, we've been talking about this one for a while. It's where this low right here ends up spinning over the Great Lakes and what follows it with a large ridge into late next week into the western United States. So given that we just got a quick look at what maybe now looks like through midday Sunday, let's go and have a look at what the models are suggesting. This is the new AIFS, the Artificial Intelligence Forecast, initiated this morning. It's got a couple of really heavy rainfall corridors here and here, and also through this part of, coming out of Saskatchewan over toward Manitoba. And again, we still have more systems entering through the northwest until this pattern begins to shift. So this will be the end. After this, you're going to get a big ridge that comes in here. All right, so that's the AIFS. This is the National Blend of Models. We go from there over to the WPC. We're going to be watching this area carefully. How long do we stay drier in this region? This is now the newest European model 7-day. And here is the GFS 7-day. I mean, I see a lot of similarities in these models overall. But this is one of the things I'm keeping an eye on. Now, you know that we've made this case all week long, that by the time we get the full absorption of the leftover tropical system, the low that was north of Japan, moving toward this part of the Aleutian Islands, that we were going to get around the 4th, 5th, there it is, the 4th, 5th, and 6th, ridging that starts to develop here. Last trough exits and heads right over here over the eastern Great Lakes, and this dives into the region that's had such warm water preventing troughs, right? We've not been able to get this to happen here. They've all been over the west coast. All right, this is June 5th. Heat's building into the west. Mexico Ridge flexing into the southwestern United States. How long does it last? Well, the European artificial intelligence leaves it around through the 7th, 8th, 9th, and 10th. And then once we get out there to like the 11th, it's trying to break it down and toss a trough into this area. Now, what's interesting about that is as it does so, it just shoves something across the U.S. and brings in storms for mid-month in the midsection of the country. And to be honest, if we go through a stretch of days, like a week to 10 days of having flow that's heat in the west, flow coming over the top like this will be drier for a while in this area. And we honestly don't want that to stay. No one does. Across the entire country, we don't want the pattern to stay like this. Why? It's too hot in the west, too dry in the Midwest, too dry in the south, and it's too cold around the Great Lakes. We want it to move. We want it to change. And the artificial intelligence says, all right, here you go. Let's move it. And it sweeps this in and then tries to rebuild another ridge, but overall keeping the pattern open and moving as we look out there 15 days. But it's right here that I'm interested in, the 10th. Do any other modeling systems show this? Well, the new ensemble, let's go out and get the data here. There is the 10th. The ensembles aren't showing it very well, are they? But I'm going to be honest, we've been using the AI model because it's been better at finding these little nuances to the pattern and these little changes that happen. So the European ensemble says, no. Leave it like this for a little bit longer. Try to keep more Great Divide ridging here. No evidence of deeper troughs coming in like the artificial intelligence did. And by the way, the GFS ensemble is kind of similar to the European. Now we're out here way out in the longer range forecast, and that's okay. I just wanted to show you, though, that I don't think that the big western ridge is like we saw in June of 21, where it established itself and then lasted for 6 straight weeks. And that's just important to note. That's something that we have to consider. So we go from here back to the models and just kind of take a look at what the precip pattern is. GFS left, European right. As we play it forward, there's the heavier rains moving through this section of the country as we get into the day on Saturday, stretching down toward the Gulf Coast. Both models agree. We then see storms again Sunday night forming right here, which we've seen in the SPC outlook. There's the next low entering the Pacific Northwest. So 1, 2, 3 setup here. We then go into Monday, into Tuesday. Again, still stormy as troughs roll across the country, but it is the 5th and the 6th where the ridge begins to build. This trough will just go live over the eastern Great Lakes. See it sitting and spinning there while the west gets hot and dry from the 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, and possibly beyond. Now, as that low sits and spins in this area, keeping it cooler and inclement, there will be a front that's draped here. And there's a low just sitting off the coast, which you can't quite see, but it's in the upper levels. And it's going to be helping to pump moisture into this boundary, which means as you look out there into the week 2 forecast, that little region is going to show up wetter. But as we go look at the next 10 days or 7 days, on the best chance of getting an inch, this is what we see. And if we stretch it out there a bit farther, this is the 10-day probability of getting an inch of total accumulated precip. The week 2 forecasts are showing that. So I like this. If you notice, wetter conditions here, it's in both models and it's also in the CPC. Front lingering. Can you see that? And over the top of the ridge, northwest flow is drier in this corridor. Drier. We just don't want that to last long. We don't want it to last too long. And so we're going to see if we can get that to break beyond that. A discussion on temperature, though. This morning, early, we have frost and freeze warnings out in the same places we talked about yesterday in the northwest. Also here and at higher elevation in parts of Pennsylvania, getting into West Virginia and pockets throughout New England. My frost map looks something like this just to complement what you just saw there. And if we look at those minimum temperatures, a lot of this was early this morning before the sun rose. Got some cooler air in place. As we play forward, there's Saturday getting into Sunday. These are min temperatures. Getting into Monday and Tuesday, there's quite a bit of a warm-up happening. There's our last big trough entering the northwest on the 4th. Watch what happens after this. From the 4th to the 5th and 6th, these overnight lows start to skyrocket in the west, and that's also the same time frame that the temperatures really build there. So Friday's highs getting into Saturday, Sunday. Look at the heat coming into the plains here. This is getting into Monday after the storms roll through the upper Midwest. There's that last trough coming through the northwest. Ready? There it is, cool on Tuesday, but watch the west coast. Wednesday and Thursday of next week. Wild swing in temperatures, triple digits in the Central Valley of California. And that's that area that's been warned by the Climate Prediction Center as having this moderate risk of and high risk of excessive heat on this kind of the 6th, 7th, and 8th, that time frame. But it'll start on the 5th, honestly, with getting hot. Day 5 through 10, again, no real story change here. And day 10 through 15. What we'll be asking is, the ensembles keep the pattern doing this. But you saw the artificial intelligence saying, no, take some of these troughs in and knock this out. That will be the key thing to be watching for the middle of the month. Because it's not just the GFS that keeps the heat in the west. The European model's doing the same thing. Keeping a lot of cooler air here, a lot of heat in the west. We want to know if that's really a feature or if it's going to start to break down. So where do we start to work our way toward the finish of this? Well, first of all, the MJO, which had been forecast to sweep way out here, is now coming back into kind of a collapsed state. And thinking about that, I want to just talk about some of the bigger picture things going on here. We've spent a lot of time discussing this, right? That warm blob, especially right in through here. And the fact that it's going to likely keep the momentum going north of it. That's that thermal wind relationship. That means we should expect to see that any ridge that builds has a lower than average chance of lasting for a long time, like 6 straight weeks because of this. Now, if this was all the way over here, I would tell you that a ridge in this area would last for maybe a couple of months, but it's not quite there. So what do we have? We have a very warm Atlantic. We have a cool, what we call PMM region, Pacific Meridional Mode region, and the PDO is being influenced by this warm blob. What's going on with our La Nina? Well, our La Nina is really starting to gain some strength. The Southern Oscillation Index is now positive, and it's expected to continue to go up, meaning that we will move into a bigger influence of La Nina once we get fully into summer. I'm talking about July and August, not in the month of June. So I look at all of that and I say, well, what does this all have to overcome? What needs to change? And the thing that we have to come back to is the placement and size of that ridge. Now we see that in the next, starting next week on the 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, and 8th, ridge is going to come in here and just knock this guy out. It's going to move that all the way over here. We want to know if that's going to last. And there's an interesting thing happening in the Atlantic that I just can't ignore. And that is the Bermuda High is weak. It's split, pieces of it here, pieces of it there as of late. And we know this is going to shift for just a little while the ridge comes into the western United States. If it lasts, and we're wrong about it not, breaking down in the middle of the month, then this could have huge implications on the downstream flow, which affects Europe and Russia. And ultimately, it's all one big, giant connected system we're going to have to pay attention to. So I want to show you the longer range outlook. Now, as we play this forward, there's that ridge building. But getting out there beyond this, the European model through the middle and end of this month wants to flex the Mexico ridge. See this? See this ridge building in here? It's not got it like we saw with the big ridge there. It's down here. And if I just step back and say, well, does that make sense? It does make sense to me because of the drought and the extensiveness of the drought in that area. But if you end up getting a pattern like this, let's just zoom in here on the United States. Our precipitation over a 30-day window, as we stretch it out there into early June and July, it would mean that we'd probably see troubles with dryness here, but storms that run over the top of this with time. But I don't think the model has any sort of a distinguished factor that it's including to give us a hard bit of evidence that it's going to change. That's what I'm saying. I don't trust it as much as, and you know why. I mean, we looked earlier at the performance of the models, and they've not been that great. So with all that being said, I have a lot of uncertainty going forward, so I'm going to look at this differently. What's some of that uncertainty? Do you remember me showing you this earlier in the week? This was the mid-June, 14th through the 20th, and the end of June, 21st to the 27th forecast by the CFSV2. It had dryness in here, and now it's just gone over wet. See that? A lot of model flip-flopping happening. So let's take a different approach. This is what's front of mind for me. I'm going to just tossing all the models out and just going to say this. There's moisture in a big section of the country here, and it even goes into the Canadian Prairie. It goes back into Montana. There's a lot of drought to the south. And we're going to watch a ridge now come in here. Don't think it's going to last for long, but this one is what I'm going to watch to see if it flexes north. Because of all the moisture that's in place here, there's plenty of local moisture to recycle for early season thunderstorms. I do think we get into a drier week too, but I don't think it lasts. I just don't think it's going to last. I think it's going to get hot after this, but I don't think it's going to last. I think we're going to be cool in this area to start June, but then after that, I'll tell you, I think it's going to get hot across much of the lower 48, but hot and stormy in this area. The places that I'm concerned about for the dryness are coming out of Mexico going forward. Now, is there any sort of like additional evidence to this? Well, possibly. I mean, it helps that the Atlantic is so warm. That is evaporating more water vapor that could be transported in here. And that's why I'm so concerned about the Bermuda High. Is that Bermuda High going to come back? Because if the Bermuda High comes back, we really start to increase that transport of moisture into the central United States, into the east coast of the United States, into the south. And if we keep this cooler, this tends to tell me that I should be watching out for ridging developing here in the southwestern United States, especially if this warmth starts to fill in the gaps. That's the bigger picture thing. And I really want to know, how strong are these trade winds going to get? And are they going to continue across parts of the Indian Ocean? Because there are some models out there that are suggesting that, like the JMA. This is a Japanese model predicting June, July, August. And look at this down here. It has really got strong trades here and here, which is indicative of a developing La Nina. And it's trying to push the MJO to live over Africa. See this? It's here and here. And there's subsidence in this area. That's phase 8. So if we get into a June time period or a July time period of a lot of MJO phase 1, even though it's been collapsing, but if it just shows up here later, this is what we end up getting. In July, we tend to ridge out here. That gets flow blocked up over the west. Cascading storms in this area. Guess where the ridge is? Right here. That's where we'll end up getting a big ridge showing up in the pattern. What about if we just see this? There we go. This would be phase 2. Again, another ridge showing up here, stormy in the midsection of the country. I'm just looking for any evidence here of what the overall state of the atmosphere could tell me it's going to do. And I'll be watching that. And the other big piece of this is what's going on in the Atlantic and how does this hurricane season respond to this? We're going to have to watch that extremely closely as the ocean temperatures in the Atlantic are really, really warm for this time of year. All right, can we finish this here? I've been mentioning some stuff going on internationally, like down here in southern Brazil going over dry again. But a lot of us have been watching the Russian wheat belt, which the GFS still keeps a lot of it dry. We then look at what the European model says, a little different projection. They're trying to bring some storms in here. AI, not much different. But one thing we do know is it's going to be really hot in that area. Like temperatures 20 degrees over a 10-day stretch, 20 degrees warmer than average, And so any rain that comes in here evaporates quickly. And that's got to be watched as well. So that's what I know on Friday. And if it is an incomplete picture, or if you don't necessarily find a solid thread, I don't either. I just want to confess that to you. And therefore, we need to watch all the way through the first week of June what the ridge does in the west, and then see how the rest of this unfolds. So I hope you were caffeinated for all of that, because that was a lot of information. But that's what I'm thinking about, and I'll just digest it over the weekend and give this another shot next week. Have a good weekend. Thanks.